All right, so we're going to continue our study of Proverbs, or more easily, if you want to put it in a colloquial terms, we're going to play Solomon Says. What does Solomon say to do in order to be wise? That is all Proverbs is. It's the wisdom of Solomon put down on paper to a notional son, of which he had many, telling them how to be wise, what roadblocks we put in our own way that make us unwise, and then what the expected outcome would be depending upon which method you choose. So we're going to look at Proverbs chapter 6, verses 1 through 35. I'll read it, and then we'll break it down. So first, if your Bible has a little heading in front of sections, what's the one here?
Warnings against folly.
Warnings against folly. Anybody have different?
Practical warnings.
Practical warnings.
Parental counsel.
Parental counsel. I like that one. That's probably closest to what's going on here in the first section of chapter 6. But chapter 6 is usually broken up into two sections. So what's the heading for the second section of yours?
Warnings against adultery.
Warnings against adultery. What's yours say? You don't have a second one. Okay, I like that. Anybody else got a second one?
Well, I've got a first one that is admonitions and warnings against dangerous and destructive acts.
Okay, that's actually very accurate.
I've got a whole bunch. First one is dangerous promises. The second one is folly of indolence. Then the wicked man. Then beware of adultery. And there you go.
Okay. Adultery is a reoccurring theme in Proverbs. Because it's a... Huh? What?
From the man with 700 wives.
Yes. Although specifically he doesn't address that.
That's really a temptation.
Oddly enough. But we will break that down as we get to that section. So Proverbs chapter 6 is a continuation of 4 and 5, where he keeps hammering home these themes about behavior. So who had behavior in their list? Because he's trying to get a point across to everyone in the room that is reading what he has written. When it comes to your life, you are the problem. Is it anyone else's life to live? No. Do you have a brain? Yes. The answer to the first question is no, and the answer to the second part is yes, and you are in a part or in a situation in which you would rather not be. You put yourself there. That's the sum of Proverbs right there for human behavior. You are the problem. What Solomon is trying to do is show you where those problems lie so that you can avoid those situations. And what does he say is the number one problem for adult men and women? He said it 4 times now in 6 chapters. Adultery. Number one problem. Then. Arguably still the number one problem now. Adultery in all its forms. And he's pretty harsh on it. So what's the number 2 problem in people's lives? It's the first part of chapter 6.
I would say selfishness, self-centeredness.
Selfishness is an aspect of it.
Your tongue.
That's an aspect of it. Repeatedly what he says is don't go running around with morons. And by morons, we say people who do things detrimental to an ordered society. That's the definition. And so he consistently comes back to, why are you hanging out with these people who do wrong, and then you do wrong, and you wonder why you're being punished. That's chapter 4, 5, and 6. We're going to look at specifically how he talks about it in chapter 6 and compare that with 4 and 5 as we continue to move forward. So first, we'll read chapter 6. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said and snared by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, to free yourself, since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands. Go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief and scarcity like an armed man. A troublemaker and a villain who goes about with a corrupt mouth, who winks maliciously with his eye, signals with his feet and motions with his fingers, who plots evil with deceit in his heart. He always stirs up conflict. Therefore disaster will overtake him in an instant. He will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For this command is a lamp. This teaching is a light. And correction and instruction are the way of life, keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. The one who touches her will go unpunished. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger when he is starving. Yet if he is caught, he must pay 7-fold, though it cost him all the wealth of his house. But a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away. For jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he will show no mercy when he takes revenge. He will not accept any compensation. He will refuse a bribe, however great it is. Actually, 2 parts that he wrote that later we put together into a combined chapter to talk about it. But if it were broken out into prose, these would be separate and distinct lessons on different sheets of paper as we move through the scroll. So we'll take a look at the first part. I think that's verses 1 through 13, maybe. Let's see. One through 19? No. Anyway, who's got help with that?
Yes, 19.
There are 6 things. 16. There are 6 things. It goes all the way, so 1 through 15. So what's the problem in this instance with this young person? What has happened to my son? What has he done that has placed him in a little bit of wisdom peril in the first 15 verses? What? You got to get up and walk around with that thing.
He's hanging out with bad guys.
He is, but more so than that. That's what he did in chapter 2 and 3. What's he done now? Did he just gasp because an 18-year-old man has to walk? That's exhausting to hear.
He's indebted himself to them.
Yes. And it's a bad deal. And so He's placed himself under the yoke of another, is how they would say it in the time Solomon wrote this. And that gives that individual full control of your time, effort, and energy. The only thing that Solomon says he hasn't done is enslaved himself to them. But he has certainly either borrowed money or made an agreement, a verbal contract, and he has placed himself under their authority for how he gets to spend his time and how he chooses to spend his time. And Solomon says that when you do that, you give up too much. That doesn't mean you can't make a contract to go to work. That's not what that's about. This is an entirely different act as we would understand going to work. He's either agreed to get seed or crops from this person in advance, and now he's under pressure to grow a crop and pay off the debt, or bad things happen to him, or he has made some form of future contract for his own labor to produce any other product we could think of, or he's borrowed money, which would be even worse, and he's got to pay it back. So he's under a lot of pressure. What does pressure do to weak men? And women. You're not exempt. It crushes them, right? Makes them desperate. Desperate people do desperate things.
Oftentimes, one decision, bad decision, leads to another bad decision, so it's a domino effect.
That's a compounding problem, right? It's just like lying. If I tell a lie, I've generally got to tell 2 lies to fix that lie. And now I've got 3 lies out there running around I've got to hang together. And in order to fix those, I've probably got to tell 5. It's remarkable. It's stupid. That's exactly what Solomon would say. That is the folly of someone who thinks they are wise and are not. But because he is wise, Solomon has a remedy. What is the remedy that he offers?
Beg for freedom.
But how does he beg for freedom in this chapter?
You should negotiate the best you can and to pursue diligently, pester him to death.
Yeah. So how do we get ourselves... So specifically, I would offer that given the follow-on verses about the ant, he says you work until you are exhausted, and that he has no recourse other than to release you from your debt through the value of your labor. You've got to pay off that debt. And how do you negotiate it every day? Have you ever finished a job early and got to go home early? No? Oh, you slaves. If I'm done for the day, I'm done. You know what I tell my guys? You can do nothing anywhere you want, but you cannot do it here. If you are done, go home. I say that to them because on the days where I do not release them, I will hear no grumblings. On the days we work till midnight, everybody stays. So what Solomon is saying is, get it done. Get this debt clear. Get it out of your life and out of your way and out of your house. And contractually, if it's a labor dispute, which is what I think this would most likely be, or it's a monetary debt. Have you ever paid off a debt early? No one's ever paid off their house early? Okay, that's usually the one that Americans race for, because that's the dream you've been sold. How'd that feel? What? Why are you laughing? What?
It's good.
It's true, right? It's the dream you've been sold. If you were truly wealthy, you wouldn't care.
Right.
That's capitalism. How'd that feel? Who's paid off their house? Just by show of hands. Just you lucky devil.
It definitely surprises the one who gets paid off.
Yeah, it surprises your wallet the next month. Your wallet's like, I feel fat up in here. How'd it feel? Relief. Yeah, relief, right? Now nobody can come take the cave. Property taxes notwithstanding. So, what did we do here when we paid off this building? We thought it was important to you so much that we celebrated a burning of the document that held us in bondage. It's important that you at least acknowledge the debts and burdens that you have, and that you try to develop methods to keep them from becoming too much weight and making you do desperate things. And the house in American history is a great example of that. Have you ever seen somebody under pressure of losing their home? Do they sleep? Probably not. It's an incredible amount of pressure. It feels like the world's crumbling. So Solomon says, never put yourself in that position. You should be able to avoid it if you are wise. One, you should see it coming. Two, you should already have taken the steps to prevent you from ever having to be in that situation. Because he only offers two ways out of it, right? The two ways that Elizabeth said. And it's really, in the pyramid of debt, there's only one way at the top for Solomon: debt paid. You cannot get out from under the burden of that debt without it being paid. So there's no bankruptcy. You can't declare bankruptcy in Solomon's time. The concept didn't exist. Because if you owed somebody something, the law itself said that they were free with the appropriate religious authorities to come in and take whatever you had, up to the full extent of it, to pay off a debt. Because it was the burden that was killing you, not having any stuff. Any other thoughts on that? All right, here we go. I love this next part. It's funny, right? Did you know this was in Proverbs? There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that he finds detestable. A haughty eyes, lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. I hear a lot of people misquote these verses. A lot of people. And I only say that because they're designed to judge you. And I have yet to ever hear anyone apply them to themselves. And so just know, from this day forward, you have no excuse. And if you ever hear anyone write those on Facebook, can you hear what someone writes on Facebook? If you ever see anyone write them on Facebook against another, know that the sin is that person's. Because the person that Solomon is talking to and writing to is you. You are the problem. You have placed yourself in a situation in this chapter where you are indebted to someone, and your weakness is forcing you to devise ways to get out from underneath your burden without paying the debt. That's what this is about. And what happens to your character when that happens? Have you ever met a human weasel? A person you just knew couldn't be trusted? I mean, typically the image in your eye is the lank hair, sallow features, just feels kind of greasy morally. And you're like, man, I'm not making any deals with you. I don't even want to give you money because... Huh? What?
Used car salesman.
Used car salesman? That's mean. But so when you're trying to get out of your moral obligation to pay a debt, and your wisdom crumbles, and all of your morals and values get flushed out with it, who do you become? Solomon says this. This is you now. And the Lord hates those characteristics in you. Yes, he hates them in others, but only on a personal level like I've just stated it. You don't have authority to hate anything in anybody else. Grab a mirror. So what are the characteristics? What are the behaviors we need to watch out for in ourselves that tell us, wisdom has left me, and now I'm out in the open? and I'm free-ranging on somebody else's territory. They're these things. Those are the characteristics of you when your wisdom has left the building and you're trying to solve your problems without Christ. To bring that forward into our day. When you're no longer looking towards Scripture as a way to live your life and you're not letting God drive your car. He's not the passenger, by the way. He's not the co-pilot. That's a bad analogy. He's supposed to be driving. Sir. You guys are walking him so much he's already drank a full cup of water. It's beautiful.
Exercise for the young is good. So when you look at it, you go into the Gospels and even going all the way back to the Ten Commandments, which we've talked about several times. They boil down to two things: loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body, and then loving your neighbors yourself. Those 6 things or 7 things up there are just the complete inverse of that.
Yeah. And you can find that in the answer to the very bottom part. A person who stirs up conflict in the community, preceded by a false witness who pours out lies. Because when you no longer shoulder the burden of the agreements that you have made, it has second and third order effects on the community. We're probably a little too large of a community. If we were 10,000 or less, I'd be like, I could stand here right now and be like, all right, everybody knows our known liar. Do not name him. It's not your job. And everyone's hand would go, yep, I know who they are. Every community has one or a family, right? People have just given themselves over to whatever destructive tendencies they have. And they generally tend to cause, chaos within a 3-block area of their home. And people-wise, probably about 4 or 5 extended family circles worth of distance of destruction. We're a little larger, so there's probably a dozen of those families in our community, and everybody knows 1 or 2, but nobody knows them all. Please do not know them all. If you know them all, you're one of them. And so Solomon speaks to us directly, and he says, do not do these. Do not do these behaviors. Write them down. Take a look at them.
What does it mean by haughty eyes?
What are haughty eyes? If you've ever had them looked at you, you know.
Arrogance.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were debating. But
Yeah. Closest you need to come to. The closest you can get probably in our own language would be the look that was given to the poor from the nobility, from horseback down.
It's interesting that that's listed first.
Yeah. People who are crumbling tend to be the worst, and they're the first to take on airs and assume a moral high ground of justification and circular logic and behaviors and lies. That's my own experience. Whenever anybody comes to me and they act like I should know who they are because they think there's somebody, red flag. And then when they start demanding things that they haven't necessarily been given, approval and authority for, and they cause harm to the organization, red flag. What's the worst type of person to do business with? And then we'll move on. Somebody who thinks their weaknesses are their strengths. Somebody who can't add, thinking they're a mathematician, is the hardest equivalent you can get to, but you probably will never see that example. Somebody who thinks they are wise when they are not is what Solomon would say. And that's why he continues to give us all these things, to make us look at ourselves, to control and grow our own behavior The goal isn't that anybody else be wise. The goal is that you be wise.
It's very hard when you're reading the 7 things, for people not to get caught up in. You know, someone says something, then you want to add to it, or you think you know more that you can add to whatever is going on. And I think, this is terrible, but I think of a group of women, I have to say it, especially, and I think of the nurses at the nurses' station, and that's including the male nurses. They start something and they want to continue it and not let go of it. And now, I have had trouble not jumping in there. It's really hard.
The struggle is real. You are not wrong.
It's very real, and it doesn't help anybody. It causes trouble, and I finally learned when someone came to me and said, "Do you know what someone said about you or about someone else?" I'd put up my hand and say, "No, I do not want to know unless it is something I need to do to improve our workplace." Because I did some things that sometimes had to be changed, but it's really hard not to get caught up in it.
It is. That's why we've got to constantly be guarded. And you're right. The exact way is to remove yourself, however difficult that is. So whenever anyone comes to me and they say, "Hey, did you hear what somebody said about you?" I always answer them with this. I say, if it was positive, I don't need to know. If it was negative, you can just rest assured it was true. I still don't need to know. So I reinforce their behavior to themselves. Think anything negative about me you want, because that's why you're bringing this to me. I don't need a drama queen. I'm trying not to be one myself. So yeah, and thank you for that, because you do struggle with it everywhere we go. What's gossip? One more thing, and then we'll move on. So I and my wife have a definition of gossip. If we are talking about somebody for whom we are going to immediately pray and or provide some form of assistance, it's not gossip. Because we're going to do a thing with this information we are sharing. If it is anything else, it is gossip, and shut your pie hole. I say shut your pie hole to women because that's polite. To men, I say shut your cheese pipe because we eat different kind of food. So that's my definition. You can have your own. You should have your own. How do you recognize it if you don't know what it is?
I've found, and a lot of times my response to situations like that is just give me the facts. I don't want to hear the extraneous additions to the problem. Just give me the facts.
Tell me you wrecked the car, not all the drama involved in it. I can hear the screams and all the crying and tears in my head. I just need to know you wrecked the car. Next part. Sort of a hard transition, right? Solomon keeps coming back to this point about adultery. And while he describes the behavior of the ladies, who does he hold accountable? My son. He says, you've chosen this. I think that it is partially because of whatever issues he has had to work through in his relationship with his father and his mother and his missing older sibling. He's Bathsheba's second child, right? What does God do to the first? He kills it. You could soften that any way you want. He let it die. God kills the child. And I say that because God said, I'm taking this child from you, David. This is the price of your bride. That's not a quote from the Lord, but it should be. A life for a life is what occurs. Whose life has David taken? Bathsheba's husband? Sending him to the battlefield, forcing the troops to withdraw from him, bringing about his murder. It's murder because it's planned. And then God sends Nathan? And they play a riddle me this game. And Nathan exposes to David that God knows and this is what will happen. And then they get through that, they being David and Bathsheba, and David and the Lord, right? David reestablishes his relationship with the Lord. And they have Solomon. I don't know that we know that Solomon knows there was a baby before. But I also don't know that he didn't. And I believe that David was a man of truth. David didn't hide things. David didn't even hide his shame from the Lord, the number one person that we try to hide things from. That's what makes him David. And so he takes it to the Lord. He says, I did this, I understand. So I can't believe he hid it from Solomon, especially when he's trying to teach Solomon wisdom, because that may be the single largest mistake David made in his life. I think it is. Not stealing the showbread on a Sunday afternoon because he and his troops were hungry. David knew why that was right. Not all of the other crimes that he committed. Crimes is in lowercase c there. Not all the other times that Samuel and Nathan had to come to him and say, you are wrong today. It was this. And so I think that's partly why Solomon continues to come back around to that. Every chapter so far, right? Every chapter, he circles around this topic. Is your life the same after you cheat on a loved one? Is it? We all know someone who's had this happen to them. It's a horrible thing. There's just so many of us. It's not a reflection of corruption in society. You put three people together on an island and two of them are going to argue about any one thing on any given day, right? There's just nothing we can do about it. But have you ever seen a person's life after this event? Is it the same? It's very much changed, right? And while it can sometimes end up better in the future, we have to go through this really emotionally intense period of grief, frustration, mourning, loss, anger. And then we rebuild our entire life and we go on, right? Is that how it works? Am I lying? I'm getting a lot of hogs staring at a wristwatch looks. So I think that's why Solomon continues to come to it. Because it destroys the one thing that the Lord gave us first. A relationship. Not only between Adam and God, but also Adam and Eve, right? In this case, probably more so Adam and Eve. And you destroy that relationship. And life is never the same for anyone involved. Not for the children, not for her, not for him, not for those around them. Have you ever had to choose a friend in a divorce? The funniest one was when I thought that we were given to a person in the divorce, kind of semi-formally, and then it ended up, they broke up with us too. That was weird.
Talking about relationships, and I'm thinking about, okay, here's Solomon giving information to his son, but he keeps the accountability at his son's level. He doesn't jump right in there and go pay his debt for him.
True.
And the conflict that I'm fighting with is family is family. You try to take care of family, correct?
No, not correct. Does it surprise you that I say that? What did Jesus say? Who is my family? You guys. Now, I'm a really bad person to ask that question because blood holds no value for me save one, Christ. I have no relationship with my blood family, nor will I ever. We had to divorce. So, However, I understand exactly what you're saying, because there are 3 people, 2 of which I share blood with, that I care very much about, my son and daughter, and then Denise, for whom I can't imagine what I would not do. Slight left turn there, but so who is our family? We say as Christians that you are my family, but we don't do it as Christians, I don't think. We fall back to blood. You do. It's okay. I don't know that there's anything wrong in it. Just know that I challenge that. I challenge that in you. And then I will confess. So my daughter carries a debt burden that I allow simply to teach her how to carry a debt burden. She's my daughter. The only bond we have is blood. She is my sister in Christ, but I don't see her here this morning. She's a couple of states away. So I do what you do, and then I said not to do that. And so how messed up am I? When one of you figure that out for me, please come share that with us. Because the struggle is real, right? Again, the struggle is real. He doesn't give any relief to his son for these acts that he has committed. You're absolutely right. He continues to hold him responsible for this thing that he has done. And he gives an example of when, as a society, we might say, okay, there's a little bit illegal with that, but we're good with it, right? The stealing a bread thing if you're starving. This is David, by the way, when he steals the showbread out of the cave when his troops are starving and he's hiding from Saul. Would you condemn a starving man for stealing a piece of bread? No. But it's still illegal, right? And if we catch him, he's going to be thrown into an impartial court system, and they're going to find him guilty because he did the thing. That's what he says. He'll still be found guilty for it. We will not condemn him. The benefit in our society today is that your trial is by a jury of your peers, who oftentimes surprise us all by letting someone go, right? You're like, oh yeah, he did that. And no, I will not convict. They didn't have that. They had the law. And the law said you were guilty. There was no jury in court. Boom, sentence rendered. So, what is the lesson of both discussions? Guard yourself. That's Proverbs chapter 2. Guard yourself and learn wisdom. That's all of Proverbs. The rest of it is how, through examples given. And in this case, he says, don't put yourself in situations where you might have to morally compromise a solution. That sound reasonable? And then he says, don't you ever do that in anyone else's relationship that is between them. Ever. Because then you are guilty of a thing. And Solomon's concern for them is that they'll be judged under the law by God, which is very black and white. When I was younger and I lived in a predominantly black Southern California neighborhood, what we used to say as a part of that, of knowing who you could and could not associate with, it was, don't trust Whitey. And I said it, and it was true in that community. Because normally they were the cops, and they weren't on anybody's side. Certainly not on our side. But all the businesses were owned by people who were taking advantage of us, and they were all white. And I say us, right? Like I'm a part of that community. I can never really be a part of that community. At best, I could live amongst it and understand it. So don't trust Whitey. That's what I mean when I say that. Don't trust anyone who comes to you with a deal that's too good to be true. Because what is it? It is too good to be true. The number one problem in America is that you all want to be rich tomorrow. Morally, that's your number one problem. And that's why you're suckers. The easiest way to get rich in America is to just be a capitalist and do capitalist things. There's almost no way in America to get rich tomorrow. And that's why it never works. It never happens. Unless lightning strikes, right? Did you buy a lottery ticket? No? So you're not even playing. So watch out for yourself. Guard yourself emotionally. Guard yourself mentally and be prepared for the things that happen in our lives. And act accordingly with wisdom. And Solomon says the key to wisdom is knowing God. So know God. Okay, that's it. With that, we're complete.